Victorian Premier says the tax summit's a mistake. A New South Wales policeman faces corruption charges. And fresh flooding hits Bangladesh. Good evening and welcome to The National for Tuesday, the 28th of May.
In other headlines tonight, the Federal Communications Minister foreshadows the possible deregulation of the Australian television industry, the House of Representatives to be recalled for an extraordinary one-day sitting, and 5 anti-abortion campaigners arrested in Sydney.
Also tonight, the Palestinians of Beirut, the target, it would seem, of senselessly brutal violence. Tonight, a report which explores whether the violence could be part of a grand strategy to determine once and for all the fate of the Palestinians. And Patrick O'Neill reports on a cookbook controversy, one that's upset many Australian book buyers.
But now, the details. Further disaster has struck Bangladesh. Floods, triggered off by the cyclone which killed thousands of people at the weekend, have now forced another 200,000 from their homes in eastern Bangladesh, about 100 kilometres from the capital Dhaka. With further heavy rain forecast for the rest of the week, the situation is likely to deteriorate even further. For the moment, though, relief operations are being concentrated on survivors of the tidal waves which swept across 7 islands in the Bay of Bengal on Friday night. Navy ships are patrolling the bay looking for survivors and bodies. But on land, all is devastation. Bodies of people, carcasses of dead animals strewn about amongst what looks like matchwood, all that remains of homes and crops. Several of the islands are all but denuded of living people. The President of Bangladesh, General Ershad, spent yesterday visiting Sandwip Island, west of the port of Chittagong. He told reporters later the devastation in the area is beyond description. The latest educated guess at a final death toll is 40,000. Definite casualty figures are impossible to come by with so many people being washed out to sea. There are stories of families down to 1 survivor, small children who've lost parents and brothers and sisters, women who've lost husbands and children. Many of the survivors have developed cracks in their skin from being soaked in salt water for hours and then exposed to the hot sun. They've gathered at the various relief centres that have been set up in the area. The Red Cross and the Red Crescent have launched an appeal to raise $2.5 million in emergency aid for the victims. A joint communique from the headquarters in Geneva said the money would be used to buy food, clothing and medicine for the 120,000 survivors most seriously affected by the disaster. One of the most urgent needs of the victims is fresh drinking water, although reports today indicate many of the dead have now been buried by the survivors in mass graves. However, there's been no time or inclination to bury the large number of cattle carcasses, although officials warn that they are a potential health hazard. Bangladesh newspapers today estimate that about 5 million people have been affected by the cyclone. Journalists who visited the affected areas say they fear there are places that have still not been reached.
The forthcoming tax summit was dealt a major blow today when the Victorian Premier described it as a mistake. Mr Cain said organising the summit was wrong because consensus on tax reform could never be reached. Mr Cain said he could think of nothing worse than 5 days of tax discussions, which in the end would achieve very little.
The euphoria and goodwill of the 1983 summit has evaporated as far as Labor Premier John Cain is concerned. In Melbourne today, Mr Cain refused to state his own position on tax reform, saying too many people were already talking. And the Victorian Premier has no hesitation in telling the Prime Minister he's made a mistake.
And Bob Hawke's been a master at getting consensus. And I think he has already said that he's not going to get consensus at the tax summit, because you have ranged there the subjective, narrow interest groups. And each is going to be putting their own point of view. Nobody likes taxes and wants to see any new form of tax.
Then Mr Hawke should have kept his policy debate within the government, made up his mind and then gone ahead with the action.
They've been courageous in doing it this way, but perhaps they are paying the price, and with hindsight, some would say that the summit was not the best way to deal with a matter.
Including you?
Including me, not the best way to deal with a matter where you get so many selfish, self-interested, subjective views put by both individuals and by groups.
Another New South Wales policeman appeared in court today on corruption charges. Superintendent Ronald Arthur Ralph is charged with conspiring with others to receive money while he was a senior policeman with a squad specifically set up to fight organised crime. Kim Jordan reports.
Superintendent Ralph appeared in Sydney's Newtown court after being arrested by members of the Police Internal Security Unit. He's charged with conspiring with others to receive money between November 1982 and April last year. Today, members of the Internal Security Unit were in court to see Superintendent Ralph appear. The charged policeman, who has worked with Police Internal Affairs Branch, said nothing during an appearance which lasted only a few minutes. Superintendent Ralph was driven from court by senior police. He's been asked to make a submission to the Police Commissioner outlining any reasons why he shouldn't be suspended from duty. Superintendent Ralph entered no plea and was granted unconditional bail. He'll reappear in Sydney's Castlereagh Street Court in June. During the last 6 months, 7 police have faced arrest, and it's understood others will be charged soon. In December last year, a detective was charged with conspiracy to import narcotics. In January 1985, another was charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. 2 detectives were charged in February with assaulting a female. And in March this year, 3 officers were charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and conspiracy to supply Indian hemp. New South Wales Police Minister Peter Anderson declined to say whether there would be a review of cases handled by Superintendent Ralph while he worked with the Internal Affairs Branch.
In view of the circumstances of what's taken place today and the activities of the Internal Security Unit over recent times, I think it would be entirely inappropriate for me to be commenting on what will or won't happen.
Kim Jordan with that report. The federal government has foreshadowed the possibility of major changes to the operations of the Australian television industry. The Communications Minister, Mr Duffy, in an address to the Federation of Australian Commercial Television Stations, has hinted at deregulation of the industry. Mr Duffy's paper, which was presented by his departmental head, Mr Bob Lansdowne, says television stations must be prepared to rewrite the rules that have governed the industry for the last 3 decades. Max Walsh has more.
Mr Duffy said the advent of the AUSAT satellite meant that there was only a small window of time, virtually this year, 1985, in which to decide the path of commercial